everyone, I'm Rebecca and welcome back to my sewing room. We are starting on a new, long-awaited, at least for me, historical project, and that is the Daniel Deronda writing habit. If you have seen any of my plans videos from the last couple of years, which, I mean, if I had had a YouTube channel longer, you would have seen it even longer than that. I have been wanting to make this dress since, I want to say like 2017 maybe? Something like that. It's been a really, really long time, and I almost made it last year. I almost made it the year before. And in fact, in 2020, when I almost made it, I actually made a mock-up. Now, of course, it's been 2 years since I tried on this mock-up, so I don't remember how it's going. I have a little written note about things, but we are going to start with trying on this mock-up. So yes, this is a super, super long-awaited project. I have been wanting to do this for freaking ever, and I'm finally gonna do it. And I have all of this fabric. I got this last January from the fabric.com like fluke wool sale when they were selling bolts of wool for ridiculously low prices. So it is not the exact right color. It's definitely more green, and it's also probably a little thicker weight than I really should be having, but it is for an outdoor garment, so I figure like the thicker weight's probably gonna be okay. Hopefully. But yeah, so this is, I think, an 8-yard bolt, and I have one other yard that they had sent me first as well. So I think I have 9 yards of this total, and hopefully that will be plenty for a dress that doesn't have ruffles and etc. So I don't know much about writing habits. What I do know is that in the 1880s, they started to move into shaped writing habits. So the skirts were actually shaped, which I will pop up some pictures up here, but the skirts were actually shaped to like go with the horse, the way that you are sitting kind of like this, you know, on a horse side saddle. And so the skirt shapes were really, really weird, and then they kind of got brought up if you were not on the horse. But prior to that, 1870s and prior, they were just really, really long skirts that were then again swooped up and back when you weren't on the horse. So that is what this one is. This movie, I'm pretty certain, takes place in the 1870s because all of the fashion seems very much 1870s fashion, not 1880s fashion, which if you have not seen Daniel Deronda, I believe it is on Amazon Prime right now. I will put some info right here if it is not on Amazon Prime, but yeah, do go see it because it's got absolutely beautiful costumes. The movie itself is like a little over dramatic period drama-ish, but the costumes are killer. This writing habit, it is really, really long skirt, and then it's kind of brought up to the side right here. You can see that in this picture, and that is how it is when she is not on the horse. So my goal is to be able to do that. I think normally I would do the skirts first, but I think with this, I may do the bodice first because then I will know just how long I can do that train for horse riding. And I will have like, I'll know how much fabric is left after the bodice since I am starting with 8 yards instead of normally for a historical project, I would want to start more like with 10 yards. Again, I think it'll be plenty, but just in case, I'm going to do the bodice first. And especially since I already have maybe some form of mock-up, we're going to do that first. So I guess the first thing is going to be trying on this mock-up. I'm a little nervous about it because I don't remember it working right, and I have a lot of notes here about things to change, some of which have checks next to them, meaning maybe I've changed them already. The other thing that I'm really not sure about with this is that I'm fairly certain that it is like a rollover collar. I forget the actual terminology for that, but it's like cut in one and it just kind of rolls over as opposed to being a separate collar with a tailored garment and everything. So I don't really know how to make that, and I have a very weird version on this mock-up. So we'll see how all of this goes. I'm nervous, but I'm also excited because I've been building this project up so much. So please keep your fingers crossed for me that this actually turns out like something. So it's not awful, but it is definitely not right. For one thing, it is too large. Like, it's too big in the back. If I put the side seams where they should be, the back has like quite a bit of extra right here, you can see, hopefully. And then obviously I haven't done up the front, but like if I were to just pull the front, the side seams would go too far forward. Well, just a skosh, I guess. Yeah, I don't know. Maybe they're pretty close, but the front has way too much because I think I had designed it to be like on this pink line. This was drawn in 2 years ago. I think that I had designed that to be the center front, but there is a lot more than that that is being able to be pinched out. Also, this collar is very strange. I could tell before I even put it on that the collar was weird because I obviously had made it too large for the neckline, and there was a portion that needed to be just like seamed out or something. But also I just feel like this collar is not how collars are supposed to be constructed. So I'm thinking maybe I need to look at a pattern with just like a collar, maybe that's done separately. I don't know. I need to look at some patterns with collars, basically, see what they look like and why or how they go together, because I feel like there shouldn't be a seam in the center back of the collar. I could be completely wrong on that. And it's been a long time since I constructed any sort of bodice that has a longer rolled collar like this. So yeah, I could be totally wrong. I do feel like it is hitting at about the right spot down here. It seems wide, but then again, it has a seam allowance in it. So without the seam allowance, I don't know, it still seems a little wide, to be honest. I feel like the collar in the movie is a little narrower than that. So yeah, it's a little wide and maybe a little tall. It's also, I have notes on this bodice from 2 years ago that the neckline needed to raise up in the back because it is way too low for something with a collar. I mean, the neckline should be about here. Hopefully you can see this since I'm turned away from the camera. The neckline should be about here, and it's obviously way down here. So it's a good inch and a half too low. Like, it's way too low in the back. So, and then there's a little smoothing that needs to happen with the darts. That's not a big deal at all. That's really easy. But yeah, there are definitely issues. I think the shape looks right overall, having the points here, having this longer like tailed section in the back. I think that that looks pretty accurate to the movie. I'm gonna have to take a really close look at the pictures again that I had printed for inspiration, but I'm pretty sure it's pretty close. But it's really the collar and neckline that are the big things that I'm gonna have to study to see, am I just doing this completely wrong? Maybe. And otherwise the fit, I mean, that's pretty small issues, you know, take in a couple seams, couple darts, etc. So I'm gonna do some figuring out of things, and I will show you what version 2 looks like. So I have taken out a whole plethora of patterns. I don't even think you can see just how many patterns are laid out here. Basically, I pulled out pretty much like every Victorian pattern that I had that has a collar of some sort that turns down like that. So the first ones that I had pulled out were various like Butterick and I guess simplicity patterns, mostly Butterick. In particular, this one right here. But the thing with this one is that it is a two-piece collar. So the back of the collar on here is one separate piece that is separate from the bodice, but is also separate from the lapels because it's a notched collar. And so where that notch is, there's a seam. So then I was like, okay, well, that kind of tells me, my guess is that it's probably going to be separate because mine is not a notched collar, it's continuous. So I didn't really look at these because these were also notched collars. Then I pulled out this Butterick pattern. And this one is a very different sort of collar, obviously, because it's like a wide collar that almost has kind of a sailor type look in the back, like it's really wide, but it is one separate collar. It is completely separate from the bodice. Like, there are no lapels that are part of the bodice or anything like that. So that kind of gave me a hint. Okay, again, it's probably going to be separate. And then the last pattern that I pulled out is actually, it's an old Laughing Moon pattern that I had tested several years ago and made for my dad. It is this men's Victorian double-breasted shawl collar vest. And shawl collar, that was the word that I was trying to think of yesterday to describe this collar. That's what this is. It's a shawl collar. Mine is obviously not going to be double-breasted, so it doesn't cross over. So I can't just like steal the pattern out of here, but I can use this as a guideline. Mine is also not as wide as this one, but I think that I can take this pattern as a guideline and kind of use it to get the shape. This is, again, a completely separate pattern. So what I need to do with this is cut off this ridiculous collar because it does not need to be part of the bodice. This is literally like, there's no seam here. This is all part of the bodice, and then I have that seam in the center back, which is silly and is not how these things work. So yeah, I need to fix that. Once I take that off, then I think I can really look at this bodice and fit the smaller issues. The one other thing that I noticed is that I was looking at some of the close-ups that I have printed out of her tails. So we've got a couple close-ups down here and this close-up here, and I think that they're box pleats. And I don't know why I didn't see that before, but I think it's kind of constructed like an 18th century riding habit where you have box pleats in there, and for some reason I don't appear to have done that in this. I don't know why. I don't know what I was thinking 2 years ago. Though, come to think of it, I may have printed these pictures out I think 1 year ago, so maybe I just didn't realize that they were box pleats yet. So I do need to fix that, but that should be a pretty easy fix that I don't think I will need to fully like put into a mock-up. That said, I may cut out a second mock-up anyway to fix the height of the neckline in the back because that is more important to me. And then if I'm doing that anyway, I might as well cut it with box pleats in the back. So I think that the front though, I can probably just like cut off the collar and not worry about it. I am going to study some of the instructions from this Laughing Moon pattern and see about, you know, facings, overlap, etc. Like if those are separate pieces generally. Again, it's going to be different because that is double-breasted and this is single-breasted, as in it just closes down the center. So, but it's been a while since I've done a button placket, and I hate button plackets. They always mess with my mind. I can never figure out the math of like, is each side cut the same width and then it's just overlapped, and then, or is it like a separate facing placket? I don't know. I feel like I have to relearn it every single time I do something like that, and it's stupid. I should just write it down and put a big note right in front of my table so that I can remember it for next time. But that's what I'm gonna do. I'm gonna study this a bit more, lose this ridiculous collar, and figure things out anew. Now I'm second guessing myself again. Does that mean third guessing? Maybe. Because the one other pattern that I pulled out but I hadn't actually looked at was this Angela Clayton Mccall's pattern. And in this one, the pieces, again, the collar is built in to the coat. And the reason that I looked at this pattern after looking at the vest and thinking that, oh yes, it's the vest that I want to go with, is that I started to look at the vest again, like actually take the pieces out, actually look at the instructions and everything. And oh my God, it's so complicated. I remember being really like, I have no idea what I'm doing when I made it the first time, but I also made it in like, I don't even know. I want to say like 2012, 2013, a long, long time ago, when I did not have ideally as many skills, though sometimes I feel like my skills have not improved. Anyway, so I started to take a look at it, and I mean, we've got like an under collar and an upper collar that are not the same size or shape whatsoever. A facing piece that adds onto there, and then it all gets attached, and there's hair canvas and all these other things that I know are very important, hair canvas, pad stitching, etc. But I don't know that I have the patience or want to mess with that much brain energy. So I pulled out the Angela Clayton pattern, and again, I have not cut these pattern pieces yet, but the collar is definitely cut in one with this jacket, which, by the way, I think I want to make like, hi Dora, I think I want to make a daily wear version of this jacket. I know I had mentioned in my 2022 projects video that I was thinking about doing a jacket to use up some of that wool that is in the corner. And I think this is the one. However, I would either change the collar completely or just add a hood. So if I did that, I wouldn't be able to use a collar that is built in because the hood has to go in a seam. So yeah, I will have to change this somewhat, and obviously I would shorten it, but this pattern might be in my very near future. Anyway, so I think this is more what I want because this is single-breasted, which means I'm not going to have to mess with anything there. The collar on this pattern is way wider than what I want, but that should be a very, very easy change. And it ends just about where the Daniel Deronda one ends. I mean, as far as like where the bodice comes together, if you look at that, it is pretty similar. This one might be a little bit lower, but they're pretty close. So if I can just pull this piece out, it's just the front piece that it's cut in one with, and compare that to this and see what I need to do to change this color that I had, I think that is the answer. There's not even that many pieces in this pattern at all. Like the front is also the facing. They're the same. I'm guessing you just cut two of them, one for facing, one for the exterior. And yeah, so that looks promising. I'm gonna cut this out and compare what I have with this and see if maybe I can just make a really easy change. So this is a really different shape. I don't know if you can tell because I'm going off the table here to try to get it flat, but the shape of this Mccall pattern fully curves out this way, whereas what I had before, which granted was way too big, it just went like straight up. So I think I'm going to need to cut a new front piece where I take everything all of the same that I had down here because that was all working well, but I try to curve this out because there's no way for me to like change what I already have since it curves out this far this way, and it will be interesting to see what this looks like. Obviously the Mccall's pattern, the back is not quite what I'm going for because it is quite a large collar, so it won't be this large, it'll be narrower than that. What I found interesting, now granted the Mccall's pattern only goes up to a size 22, which I guess actually because this is a coat and it has tons of ease, maybe this is really my size, but I found it interesting that it's only a tiny bit wider than what I had, and my lapels already seemed a little wide. This one is patterned with a huge lapel, so I don't know, that was me lining up the arm's eye. But yeah, I'm gonna try and do a recut of this, probably a recut of the back with a higher neckline and the tails, and then see what that all looks like. But that is gonna be tomorrow because I have to go to rehearsal. It is finally time for mock-up trial number 2. And I say finally because the last clip that you watched was, I'm pretty sure, from Tuesday, and it is now Friday at 11 p.m. Yeah, but I finally have the second mock-up. All that it involved was cutting out new pieces for the fronts and for the backs, and then of course putting everything all together, but trying to figure out how to translate that Mccall's jacket pattern into what I already had here that already fit and worked really like everywhere except for around the neckline and the collar. Was really challenging, and I was kind of having a mental block for it for at least a day or so, and finally really cut everything, I think mostly yesterday and today. So it's cut, it's together, it's not perfect. One of the things that I messed up was I actually seamed the collar the wrong way around. I'm pretty sure, I'm not positive, well, maybe the collar actually does seam this way around because then you cut 2 of these fronts, and so then the other one would sandwich on top. So yeah, maybe that's right. I don't know. But I actually wound up cutting off a significant portion of the collar pattern. So the collar pattern goes out to here. I don't know how well you can see this on here, but it goes out to here. This is cut for a size 22, but it's a 22 coat. So the coat has enough ease that actually a 22 coat is larger than my corseted measurements. If I go to make this a coat, I will have to size it up probably to a size 24. But I decided to go with pretty much the 22, and this orange line right here is where I cut it. So I actually made it a lot narrower because I wasn't going for that really wide back of the collar or really wide anywhere of the collar. So I did cut it a lot narrower, but I actually wound up cutting off this much, so about 1.5 inches, I'd say, of the collar width as well. So I wound up needing it to be here as opposed to there. I'm also still not positive that it's the right shape. I don't really feel like it is standing up in back as I would want it to be. And in fact, what I have done here is I've pinned out more of the collar. I don't know how much you can see right here, but I've pinned out more of the collar that will need to go away because it was laying too flat and I needed it to stand up a little more. So by taking some of that and tapering that back seam in, I could make it stand up more. But I haven't actually sewn that yet because I only just noticed it as I was putting it on. So, or not even as I was putting it on. I was like, form, oh yeah, no, that's right, pin. Okay, now let's put it on. So that is thing number one that needs fixing. The other thing is trying to match up the shoulder seams with the collar and whatever was just like mental gymnastics. And what wound up happening was you can see that the front is now like 1 inch or so wider than the back. Now the front, honestly, I think that's going to be too wide because I want the shoulder seam to be probably like that inch in anyway. So that's fine. I can take that in right here at the apex of the shoulder. However, I think you can see that this white underneath is actually my chemise. It is not like part of the bodice, and that should be wider as it goes around the back of the arm. So I probably need to add in about 1/2 inch for that seam allowance because right now it's hitting like right where the seam should be, which means I don't have seam allowance to set the sleeve in. So I will need to widen that out just a little bit, like right about where my fingertip is, and taper that up to where the shorter bit is in back at the shoulder. So yeah, that is note number 2. Note number 3 is that I did not actually put in the box pleat from the side pieces because otherwise the side pieces worked and I know how to put in a box pleat sort of thing. So like you can see, I think the other box pleats are in there. I think the look is right. I think that's what I want. And so I will need to, when I'm recutting the side and the actual pieces, I will need to extend that out. I think it was like 3 inches is what I calculated. I'll need to extend that out 3 inches in order to be able to have that other half of the one box pleat. Because I do actually have, I've got a half in there. I don't know how well you can tell, but like I've got a half that's right here. But I didn't do this seam because I didn't put the other half in. So yeah, I will have to do that. But otherwise, I think it's there, I hope. Like I'm a little bit worried about just going and cutting into the wool. And I do kind of wonder if it's not quite as close to my neck as it should be. But you know what? There's only so many mock-ups that I can do, because they drive me crazy and I really want to actually put this together. Also, it's Friday night, so I don't know where we're going to get to at the end of this video. So I think I'm going to make marks as to where I need to change things like arms, eyes, and collar in the back here. And I've already made that mark with the box plates, and start cutting wool. Keep your fingers crossed for me. By the way, I did want to show you before I go cut all of this out that what I have now done, other than like mark where I need to increase the arm's eye and also cut off the part that needed to be decreased, is that I've also drawn this dotted line down the front here. This is where I'm going to cut the facing for. So the jacket itself, or the coat pattern, says to just cut 2 fronts, but its fronts are like facings, like they're very narrow. They're pretty much just facings, and then it has a seam instead of like where I have these darts. And so I'm not doing that, but I need facing for this. I don't want the entire inside front to be 2 layers of wool. That seems a little excessive, especially since this is thick wool. So hopefully this won't be too much as is, but I'm gonna cut my facing to here, and then it will just have the edges folded in and be pressed and probably whip stitched in place to the interlining, which I'm planning on just using twill just like this, except not this identical because obviously I have to tweak things back here, but I'm planning on using twill for the inside. So the bodice is going to be wool and then the cotton twill and then the facings of the wool, because that will be what gives me the collar up here as well. So now I'm going to go take this apart and cut that all out. I lied, one more thing, is that I was looking at my pictures just to see if I was getting the collar shape right, and it wasn't quite right. So you can see maybe this orange line that I've drawn. I'm going to cut that off, but also I'm going to make the collar wider because I feel like I like the width right now, which means it doesn't have seam allowance. So I'm going to increase the width by 1/2 inch for the seam allowance, except that in the back, I actually pinched it out even more so that it would potentially like stand up as it goes around, which it seems to be doing right now. So by pinching it out more though, it's gotten shorter. So by the time it gets to the center back, I'm actually going to increase the width of the collar by 1.5 inches. And my marks over here are like to where to start that tapering. And hopefully that will give me what I want. But if it doesn't, oh well, because again, I'm cutting it in the wool. So I wanted to show you this technique that I'm using for marking the darts on here. So this on top right now is the mock-up, not the one that I just did, but the one before that. But what I had done to this, even to put them onto the second mock-up, was the darts, I had actually slit up on one side along where I had sewn them. So there's a slit here, there's a slit here, and that way I can go and I can just draw this line in here in the slit. And then this one, it's also pretty easy to now access the other side, and I can see like where this line still is over here and just transfer that to over here. So I decided I might as well use it for this as well. So that's what I'm doing currently. I have everything this pile, everything cut out and also flatlined. It's all serged along the edges so that I could flatline the twill cotton lining to the wool. I hope it's not too thick. I was a little worried about flatlining it, but I did actually look in Prior Attire's book here, and she does flatline it as well. This is the second volume, by the way. I will link that down below because I'm pretty sure that's still available, and it's definitely a great resource. Highly recommend checking that out. And I will be using actually the skirt pattern for the skirt of this as well, since this is 1872, so we're pretty close to where I'm aiming for right here. And so now I'm just marking these darts, and that way I can sew together all these pieces, which will then be the end of this video. One other thing that I'm doing in this instance that I don't normally do is that with the darts, I've actually gone and I've sewn just on the inside of the line for the darts, and I've done this with like a fairly large stitch, and this way it doesn't separate when I go to actually do the darts since this is so thick. And I want this to just all be together. I'm hoping that because it's just on the inside of the line, none of this is actually going to show once I make the darts, but if so, I can always pick it out. But yeah, so that's what I've done on both fronts just to make the dart making easier, and Dora agrees. So I just wanted to show you what this rather pleasing looking assembly is looking like so far. So this is the back with the side back and side, I guess, of this bodice. Basically the whole back except for the front pieces. And what I've just done is I have pinned the box pleats in place. So to do that, you do this seam separately and then this seam separately, and then there's this part that sticks out, which I've already pinned, and I probably should have showed you. But basically it's literally a 90-degree angle. It sticks right out, and then you meet the seams and you pin them in place, and then you stitch them in place. And I'm going to be stitching this with like a whip stitch because that's what I know to do. And so I'm going to whip around the edges probably from about 1 inch or so down here and then all the way across the top and down. So we've got the center pleat, which is here, and then there's also pleats under here. So there's the box pleat there, box pleat there, box pleat there. So 3 box pleats, and I think it looks just like it was supposed to, which is nice considering, if you remember, I hadn't actually mocked up this portion of the box pleat yet. But yeah, it's looking pretty good. So this is what it looks like now, but as it is 2 in the morning, I am going to go to sleep and show you what it looks like actually on tomorrow instead of today, even though tonight's already Saturday. And I may even put the facing on the collar as well in this video. Not really sure, but in any case, I will see you in the morning. So here it is. The bodice is on. It is thick. Like, This is a lot of wool, especially where like the darts are, or like back here the collar feels really thick, even though it doesn't even have the facing on it yet. So this might be interesting, and it might be something that I can only wear when it's very cold out, because I mean obviously I don't have the sleeves on or the skirt or anything either, and that is going to add a lot more. It just feels like really thick. So otherwise though, I mean, I think that things are on the right track. The two things that I'm noticing are that I do still feel like this collar is, see how it's sticking out right there? So I think that this needs to be taken in probably another like ½ inch on each side by the time it gets to the bottom of this, just so that it will not flare out there. You know, I want it to kind of have that stand up and come back look. Hopefully by taking that in, that's not going to really change the shape. I know it will somewhat. Hopefully it doesn't do it enough that it's like a problem, because otherwise I would rather have a collar that like flares out a little bit than one that goes like this or something in the center. Obviously that would not be good. So I have to fix that and fix it on the facing as well, since I have also put the facing, I've done this seam on the facing, I just obviously haven't put it on. And then the one other thing, and I'm not positive that that's an issue yet, but I think it is that the waist is actually a little too big. Like there's a lot more of the flap here than there is like here or here. I just have 3 pins on this so far, and I need to read the instructions about how, once you have the facing on, how that overlap works. Because if it's a matter of just like adjusting the button a tiny bit, okay, but if it's more than just a tiny bit, these are gonna look off. So obviously I don't want them to look off center or anything. I think what's going on is that this side back panel, or somewhere right in here, is a little too large at the waist, because the waist seam is coming forward by the time it gets down to my waist, whereas like up here, or the side seam, I guess I should say, the side seam is great under the arm, but by the time it gets to the waist, it is forward, which means that the back is too large. So I think that's what's going on. If all else fails, something like that may also be easy to correct in the darts, but I mean, it's also easy to correct in like a seam. So I'm actually thinking that I am going to put the facings on before correcting it, because then I could always just take the seam in a little bit more. Because there's no lining, it's all exposed seams, until I do like the facing on the bottom, it's not an issue. And I still have to figure out how to do the facing on the bottom, but I'm gonna cross that bridge when I get to it, because I know I need some sort of facing. I don't know if that just needs to be like bias, or if it should be cut to size because of these points. So yeah, I have to figure that out. But again, that's gonna be down the road in a future video. I think I'm going to go ahead right now and see about the tweak there and see about the facing, and if that's all good, then I will show you what that looks like. Otherwise, the next thing you'll be seeing from me is the outro. I think I fixed the collar issues. I actually wound up taking in the back of the bodice as well as the collar, because I think part of it was that it was just coming too far away from my neck, like from the base. So I tapered up kind of from like here-ish in mid-back to the top. I actually wound up taking a full inch out of the top, ½ inch on each side, and then I started at that point with the collar taking in the ½ inch on each side, but you can see from this flap here just how much I wound up taking in. I haven't measured it yet, but it was at least 3/4 of an inch each side, if not a full inch each side. So it does seem to be laying much better against my neck now. Like, I think that's where it needs to be. So I am going to serge off the excess. I'm actually going to undo the seam that is separating the collar from, or the seam that is attaching the collar from the bodice. I need to undo that so that I can have access to the sides of this seam, and I'm going to serge off the excess both on the bodice portion and on the collar portion, because it's a lot of bulk. Otherwise, like as much bulk as I can get rid of as possible, that is what I want. But before I do that, I'm going to mark where I got to here on the facing, so that I can do the same seam on the facing as on here, get rid of that excess, which that one I just have to cut it. So the nice thing about this wool, it does not seem to fray at all. The only reason that I did serging at all is because this is faced with the interlining in here with the twill and the twill phrase, but this wool does not fray, which is nice because it means that when I go to do my coat, which again I'm planning to do as the next project, and I'm using the red wool that is the exact same as this, I shouldn't have to worry about any fraying or any like serging or, you know, any of that sort of stuff. So that'll be very nice. But anyway, I will need to take this bit in and then I can put the facings on, and I think that will be it for today. So two things. One, the serging went fine on the collar portion, but for some reason it decided that the bodice portion was just too darn thick and it wound up like just falling off and chewing up the edges. So I'm debating about covering that maybe with bias tape or something. I mean, it's the inside. I don't really care. Like, it was just going to be exposed serging, but now it's exposed really crappy looking serging. So yeah, I might cover that. And then speaking of bias tape, the pattern, the Mccall's coat pattern, calls for the facing to be edged with bias tape so that you don't wind up having to fold in the facing or anything like that because it's so thick. So you just apply it really close to the edge. It actually said to top stitch, and I was just like, why? That's ugly. So I stitched in the folds, and this can just fold over. There's no difference in thickness, and this is going to get pressed in place, and that way to finish it on the inside you just whip the bias tape edges and you don't have to worry about, you know, any of the folding of wool or anything thick like that underneath. So it just dawned on me that I forgot an important step while doing all of this bit with the facing, and I'm sure that you were all thinking to yourself right now, oh, I know what it is, duh. Because yeah, it was a duh moment when I realized it just now, and that's because I forgot collar actually like interfacing, like, you know, the stiff stuff that makes it lay nicely and stuff. And I mean, part of me is almost hoping that like, maybe I don't have to do that, and the other part of me is telling that first part that that's stupid because you always need to put interfacing in a collar because otherwise it's just going to be floppy. I mean, this is like, it is fairly steady, but with this, no, I need interfacing. The coat pattern, the Mccall's coat pattern, calls for sew-in interfacing, not fusible. I don't even know what I have, so I know I don't have enough fusible for this. I may have sew-in. I never use sew-in interfacing, and I hate the stuff, the regular sew-in interfacing that you get in the store. I'd so much rather use like the hair canvas type interfacing, but I know that I do not have that. So that brings us to the end of this video, because I think I'm gonna go online and see if I can maybe get any of it here pretty quickly. The funny thing is that I had already been waffling about next week's video potentially being the red coat and not the Daniel Deronda bodice because I've just been kind of itching to get started with the coat, and I don't have everything that I need for the coat either. I don't have the Benberg rayon that I would need for the lining, or obviously the interfacing for the collar. But since I don't have the interfacing for the collar on this either, I am now kind of thinking I'm going to switch the coat, start in on mock-up phase with that, cut it out, etc., get it to basically this point of coatiness, and maybe by then, by the end of next week, maybe I will have the interlining or the rayon or anything like that, and I'll be able to get farther with the coat than I am with this bodice. But yeah, I mean, my other option, I guess, is working on the skirt. So I guess, surprise, you will get to check in next week to see which project I choose. Will it be the coat, the red coat that is modern but historical inspired with this Mccall's pattern, or will it be the skirt to the Daniel Deronda riding habit? Because I can tell you, immediately I cannot move on forward with this until I get that interfacing. So anyway, I do hope that you enjoyed this video. If you liked this video, please go ahead and click the thumbs up icon. And if you'd like to see more videos like this from me, please go ahead and click subscribe and the little bell icon to be notified every time I post a new video. I do post videos here on YouTube twice a week, with my sewing vlogs like this out on Tuesdays and other costuming content out on Saturdays, but I post every day over on my Instagram, so please go follow me on Instagram. That's at Lady Rebecca Fashions. And if you'd like to help support all of the work that I do on this channel, I do have a link to my Patreon and my Ko-fi Ko-fi down in the description below. I'd also like to give a special shout out to my Edwardian level patrons, Sharon and Julie. Thank you all so much for joining me today. Have a wonderful week, and I will see you all back here very soon for my next video. Happy sewing!